Welcome to the M&A Unplugged podcast. Our mission is to help you be better prepared for your business acquisition or sale. Being prepared will ensure you maximize returns and minimize risks. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Domenic Rinaldi.
Welcome back. I'm Domenic Rinaldi, host of the M&A Unplugged podcast. My guest today, Tom Hine, has built a robust wealth management practice over 20 years. One of the keys to his growth has been his relentless pursuit of acquisitions. Tom shares his experiences acquiring and integrating 7 firms over a 16-year period. But perhaps the most important lessons came from the 100-plus transactions he walked away from. As Tom will tell you, his success has been every bit about the deals he acquired as well as the ones he walked away from. Tom has learned so much about growing through acquisition that he authored the Zen of Business Acquisitions, which is available on Amazon. It was such a pleasure hearing Tom's story, and I know you will learn a ton from this episode. I hope you enjoy our podcast. If so, please take a moment to subscribe and review our show. We really appreciate it. And by subscribing, you'll be notified of new episodes and the bonus episodes we plan to release in the near future. In the meantime, if you have any questions about buying or selling a business or need to better understand the process, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly at drinaldi@sunacquisitions.com. We are committed to helping you avoid the common pitfalls so you can maximize value and minimize risks. Thanks for being here, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hey, Tom, welcome to M&A Unplugged. It's so nice to have you here.
Thanks, Domenic. Great to be with you and your audience.
Thanks. So I've been thinking about this interview for a while now since we first talked, and I'm so excited because you are the epitome of what we talk about with clients in regards to, buying a business and then taking that business to the next level. And you've done just that. I mean, it's amazing. And you even wrote a book about it. But why don't we start off with, if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your practice, and then we're going to dive into how you've grown it through acquisitions.
Sure. Thanks, Domenic. So a little bit of background. I got out of graduate school, undergrad at MBA at University of Connecticut in the mid to late 80s. And I had a brief stint basically doing some programming in Lotus 1-2-3. So that kind of dates me a little bit. But I also worked for Accenture. It was Arthur Andersen that turned to Accenture. So before I got into running my own businesses and acquiring, I actually had a very good corporate background in both insurance and financial services. So that's kind of the background behind how I got into this, is I had that background to begin with. Okay. And then my first job was really as an insurance agent, literally life insurance agent, peddling insurance and annuities. And then the early 90s, anyone that's in the wealth management career can share this with you, that the career exploded from just insurance or investing into really this wealth management ensemble where you would work with the clients on their life insurance. Maybe you had a tax preparation service that you integrated with. Maybe you had an estate planning attorney, and then you did the asset management. So right around the early to mid 90s, it mushroomed from these individual silos to all of a sudden all these wealth management firms started to spring up for all the right reasons.
Yeah. And so you decided that at some point in time you were going to venture out on your own and you wanted to own your own business.
Correct. So what happened was...
Talk about that transition. How did you make that transition?
Yeah, first of all, it was a great time in the late 90s to leave what I call the bubble of the insurance industry, where they paid you a salary and you had maybe a draw against commissions. And so I will admit some very important things. One, I was single at the time, so I had no family to support, and that is really important. No pressure on me financially. And I know some people make that jump at the right time, and some it can be more challenging. Number two, again, like today, a strong economy, so I had the wind at my back. And number three, very important part of it, I went from the insurance, what they call proprietary world, where you had to sell the products that your home office, manufactured. Then I went independent, where you could offer anything from Vanguard to Fidelity to T. Rowe Price and do the best thing for your client. So keep in mind those three sort of forces behind me helped me go from the independent insurance agent into the wealth management financial planning career on my own.
Got it. And so did you open up shop with anybody else, or did you do this on your own? How did you take that leap?
Yeah. So I actually opened up shop with two other individuals in my town. I'm in central Connecticut, roughly 2 hours from Boston, 2 hours from Manhattan, just to kind of place me geographically. And so, yes, these two individuals were both planners. We really had a great team set up. One of them was a marketer and did brilliant marketing. The other gentleman was a CFP like me. We were the technical people. And so in the beginning, it worked out phenomenal in the sense that we kind of worked as a well-oiled machine and went from that insurance world where we did a lot of public seminars and we grew our client base. So for many years, that business model worked successfully.
Yeah. And were you able to take clients with you from your previous firms? So did you have a foundation when you moved, or did you have to start from scratch?
Yeah, we actually started from scratch, but let me add this footnote, because back when we moved, non-competes and non-solicitation agreements were almost unenforceable and hard to find. Today they're more common. Yeah. But what we did was, and this is a good for anybody in your industry listening in the wealth management, what we did is we kept client relationships where we moved, it's called an in-kind transfer. So we didn't sell anything. We became agent of record for all their annuities and life insurance. So we weren't crossing any compliance boundaries, because we never told the client, sell this and buy this. We just maintained the relationship, which worked perfectly. And then we kept marketing to new clients. And then as those surrender charges decreased on those products, and if we found something better, then we were able to combine the client relationship with a better product. So it was a bit of new marketing and keeping in contact with really a pretty good user base that was installed.
Yeah. So how long were you running the business before you decided that maybe an acquisition was a path to grow? And had you tried other avenues to grow and just you weren't successful? What got you to the point where acquisitions were the way forward?
Yeah, actually, this is a great story within a story, Dominic. What happened was, when I made that comment that the three of us worked together, it was a good business relationship for a while. What happened was, ironically, one of the other partners, the more senior one, wanted to look at retirement. I myself and the other guy, we were in our 30s. We were like, wait a minute, we're not ready. So what happened was, it was a great time for, basically, I moved on to start my own firm. And we had an agreement. I took the prearranged clients that I knew I would get. So by the time I was on my own for a little while, when all of a sudden this first idea of acquiring companies came across my desk. So basically went from a 3-person firm, broke away on my own for the right reasons. And then within a year of that, came across this practice that would be my first acquisition back in 2004, believe it or not.
Wow. All right, so you got 16 years ago. And I'm curious, we're going to get there, but at this point in time, so fast forward, to 2020, how many transactions have you done? How many acquisitions have you made?
Yeah, we've looked at, I say my firm now, my employees, we've looked at over 100.
Wow.
And we're working on deals number 8 and 9 right now, meaning 8 and 9 are in the preliminary phases. It could be that 8 and 9 don't happen with these two candidates. It could mean they both happen. You know how the business works. Could be one happens and the other one doesn't. But yeah, we're working on 8 and 9. And I tell you, I said no so many times, but I said no because the deals weren't right. And thank God, one of the famous quotes I'll share with you and your audience is, and I heard it from somebody else, the best deals you do are the bad ones that you don't do, right? In other words, by staying away from the quicksand, yep, and the falling rocks and the slippery road, when you stay away from that and focus on just the good ones, first of all, you have a much calmer environment. Your employees, your team enjoy it. But second of all, you actually grow, in our case, 10 times the revenue, over that 10, 12-year period, without really too many hiccups. There's a few, but not too many along the way.
Yeah, I mean, that quote is so accurate. Your ability and willingness to walk away from a deal is your greatest strength in a negotiation. We tell people that all the time, whether you're on the buy side or the sell side.
Correct.
Your ability to be able to walk away when things don't seem right is your greatest strength, and will save you lots of heartache. So you're on a path roughly to do a transaction every other year, one every
Correct.
2 years roughly. So let's wind back to 2004 and the first transaction, the first acquisition that you did.
Yes.
How did you go about it? What did you do well? What did you not do so well? Talk about that experience. And did you have a team of advisors, M&A people that were helping you?
Yeah, great question. By the way, I reconnected with that original seller. He's now in his 80s as a friend. We remained friends, and I called him just last week to wish him happy holidays. So it's kind of a great, full circle. The story was, Dominic, and I was, the analogy I use in my book, for those of you that have trained in martial arts or judo, I was a white belt at the time in the M&A business, right? Meaning I was new at it. So the story is, one of my loyal employees, she had an email come across her desk literally like randomly in 2004 saying that there was this business for sale in Connecticut, and they were a Charles Schwab institutional broker dealer. And I was with a different firm at the time. And she said, well, maybe you're not interested. You know what? Let me give the guy a call. He's in Connecticut, So lo and behold, I called him up. He was an engineer. I had an MBA in finance. And one thing I want to share with your audience, it is really important that the seller and buyer have at least some commonality, meaning you don't have to have identical backgrounds. You don't even have to have the same politics. But if you have nothing in common, with a seller or buyer, I would just say that's a potential red flag. In our case, he was analytical. I was analytical. We had a meeting of the minds. I call it the Vulcan mind meld. And so that was number one. That worked out well. The second thing I'll tell you, and this is kind of like in the school of hard knocks, the deal almost didn't go through because we were both white belts, right? He was selling for the first time. I was buying for the first time. It was like the blind leading the blind. And what happened was the attorney I was using at the time, who was a really good corporate guy, but didn't know much about, M&A and financial services. So I kind of joke that when we had this, what I call the offering, the letter of intent, Dominic, it was so many pages. It was like United Nations Security Council briefing. I had so many hooks and clauses that you couldn't figure out what was the offer and what was the hook or the clause, the out clause. So the good news was, because the seller and I had a good reputation, when he got my, my faxed version, he nearly had a coronary and said, oh my God, the deal is off. And I said, wait a minute, my lawyer was trying to help me out. So we got together in person, we sat down, we realized, what were his concerns, what were mine, and we got rid of probably 11 out of 19 pages. And so we did go on faith. But I'll share with your audience out there, you need a really good corporate attorney who's done these, because you can scare the buyer or the seller with so much legalese that they become a deer in the headlights. So that's definitely one thing I do different now.
Yeah. Yeah, you brought up a couple of points here. I mean, it's so important to surround yourself with an M&A team. Advisors who really understand mergers and acquisitions, whether it's an accountant or an attorney or an M&A advisor like myself. And then the other thing you hit on here is rapport. We don't so much say that you need to have commonality, but what you need to have is rapport. You need to have the ability to talk mano a mano with each other and respect each other and have that rapport, because as you just illustrated, every deal, I've been doing this a long time, every deal hits a speed bump.
Yep.
Some big speed bumps, some small, but when you hit speed bumps, you have to have that basic foundation of rapport in order to get past it. If you don't have that, deal is dead. It's not going any further. But if you do have that, you've got a chance to get to the next step to see, is that a material speed bump? Is it something we should walk away from? So those are two really good points.
And I want to add, Dominic, years ago, this will be a subject for a different podcast, but I had written a book about arbitration. I went through a very tough arbitration and I won it. But here was a great quote from my lawyer. He said to me at the time, Tom, I'd rather have, as an example, 2 good business partners and a bad operating agreement, or a good buyer and a good seller, meaning good character people, and a bad agreement, because with the humans we can overcome that, rather than one good buyer, maybe someone who's a seller who may not be working in what they call the best interest, and then have a perfect agreement. So his theory was, if you have 2 good human beings that are operating in good faith, that can overcome some bad wording in a contract. So I want to share that with everyone as well.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think that's exactly right. It always comes down to the principles in the transaction. They're operating in good faith and they want to get a transaction done and everybody's motivated. You figure it out.
Exactly.
And if somebody's not, then you don't figure it out. I mean, it just happens. These deals die, right? Because they're not really motivated.
Yep.
So you get that first transaction done. How did integration go? What did you learn along the way? I mean, because that's the other piece that we talk to people about. It's not so much about getting a deal done, but then it's, okay, now you got a tiger by the tail. How do you integrate it in? Do the cultures mesh? Is there a loss of clients? All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, great question. At the time, I only had 2 employees. Now I have 7, so I grew. But I learned from my days in the Accenture, Arthur Andersen world. I literally wrote out a script to the seller and said, here's what we should agree on before we meet, with the clients, right, one-on-one. And so we kind of reviewed it. And I said, tell me where you're comfortable. Tell me like what we call the not to-dos. How do I not put my foot in my mouth and say the wrong thing to the wrong client? Right? All those things are important. So we kind of had a game plan, almost like someone was writing a 3-act play, and the reason for that is I said, if you tell me the 2 or 3 things not to do, I'm pretty good at remembering that, And then he said to me, for example, don't tell them I'm retiring overnight. We had a 4-year earnout. So I said it was a multi-year engagement. And that's what, so we learned, we kind of choreographed what each one said. And I said, look, I know when I get off the phone or we leave lunch, they're going to call him back one-on-one and ask him, what do you think of this guy, right? Yeah. So I wanted him to know that when I leave lunch, I don't want them to have a different answer from you privately on the phone than they saw us in person. So I really did take my time on that part. I nailed it. And ever since then, we've had a rehearsed Q&A that I put together for all the sellers well before the deal is done, saying, are you comfortable with these answers to the questions we're going to, and if they're not, let's edit them now before the deal's even done.
Great. That's great. How about people? Were there people issues that you had to consider? And
yes, absolutely. Believe it or not, there was one admin person on his side that did very good work, but there was almost like a personality conflict where they became like they thought they were the big boss. And so afterwards, when I talked to him about this individual, he agreed with me, said, I should have taken action a long time ago. So guess what? Within 2 months, I had a minor severance package, let the person go on good terms. And he said I should have done that a decade ago. So I felt really good about that. I mean, it wasn't easy. I don't want to give your audience an idea that I love letting people go, but I learned, there's a famous quote. They say, hire slowly and fire quickly. Absolutely. Right? Take your time in hiring, but let go. And there's a lot of personality tests to find out who that is. So that was number 1. Number 2, because this firm was only an hour from my corporate office, still in Connecticut, I was able to play almost like, hey, I'm right down the road from you guys. Connecticut being a small state, this wouldn't work necessarily in Houston or Austin or Dallas, where you're hours apart. Yeah. But in the end, here is a quick story I'll tell you. A lot of people, what we call downstate in Connecticut, near New York, they first said to me, oh my gosh, you're all the way near Hartford, Connecticut, right? Which was, it was an hour away, up the Merritt Parkway, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the analogy, Dominic, you'll appreciate this. And I politely said to them, do you go to New York City? And they go, yeah. And I go, you mean you're an hour away from Manhattan, right? And then they said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, you're an hour away from where you're to go to work. I'm an hour away when I want to visit you. And finally, they made the connection that I'm really not that far away.
Yeah, without a doubt. Although the Merritt Parkway can be a parking lot. I've been on that.
It can
I've
be.
been on the Merit when it's only 2 lanes each way, and a lot of people in Fairfield County going with one way or the other. So
I used to, yeah, go ahead.
So did you know fairly quickly after consummating this transaction and integrating it in that this was the path forward for you, that acquisitions was going to be one of the ways you built your business?
I did, and also let me share something with your audience. It was fun. First of all, I got a surge of energy that to this day has not mitigated. Right? I love, it's not just
it comes through.
Yeah, it's not just the art of the deal. I love trying to work with them around any challenges, let them know their clients are taken well care of. So the fun part for me was it wasn't even the fact that it would be very profitable, and it was. I just got a real kick out of meeting new people, letting them know that, in this case, the seller wanted the best environment for his clients and all that. So number one, that worked out really fun. Number two, though, I'll share with your audience, I did not anticipate, even though I came from Arthur Anderson, I was a consultant, I wasn't a tax guy. But what happened was I became cash flow rich and tax poor in the first year or two, because those deals were different than the ones we do today, which we'll circle back on, right?
Yeah.
So what happened was my revenue jumped, right, in the second year, and then my tax bill hit, and I'm like, whoa, I felt like I took a step backwards, right? And that's when I learned, luckily, I was always pretty conservative, had a lot of cash in the bank. So just a hint to all of your listeners out there, you really want to have your tax person run the numbers to say, for example, I had a lot more ordinary income coming in, but I couldn't write it off, as you know, in year one, whereas the seller had capital gains. But in the end, here was the great story, Domenic. Within 4 months of taking over that practice, I grew it by 25% because one client had a huge private trust account, what we call outside money, and I convinced that client it was better with my firm. And so that wasn't even on the radar. That was sort of what we call a lucky jump.
Yeah.
But the second big one, Domenic, for me was this was a wealthier clientele, downstate in Fairfield County.
Sure.
So all of a sudden my skill set for advanced estate planning and everything else went through the roof because I had to get smarter working with a clientele that had a larger net worth. So number one, other than the tax issue, was profitable. And number two, my confidence and my skill set really went up.
That's great. Yeah, that's tremendous. What a great story. And look, do I believe in luck? Yes, I do. But luck is hard work, meaning preparation. So you were, in the battle, and, you were making it happen. So right place, right time, but you were also mixing it up at the same time.
Yep.
So next deal comes around. Did you source it? Did it fall in your lap? Like how do you go about finding new opportunities? I mean, 100 deals to vet over 16 years, that's a lot of deals. You're looking at, good number of deals every year. So how are you going about sourcing opportunities?
Yeah, great question. So again, depending if your audience is in financial services, right, investments, I have one answer for them, and then for the other people, another one. If you're in financial services, everyone in my line of the business will know the term wholesaler, institutional wholesaler. And I can say this to this day, I was proud that myself and my team made these wholesalers, the ones that we wanted to work with, our best friends, right? They were people that were calling on dozens of people like me every month, all around Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island, you name it. So I made them my best friends, A, because they had good products, but B, they were like a sales force that was not on my payroll, right?
Yeah.
So that was huge. That was a biggie. The second thing I did, believe it or not, I started doing some direct mail marketing. Believe it or not, it worked. Getting my name out there, but I didn't. This is a big thing. I only wrote, or my team and I, Domenic, probably one letter a year. And I had a former friend of mine who was an author of a book who has his own resume service. He would pick apart the letter and make it sing, make the grammar perfect.
Yeah.
So I only wrote 1 or 2 letters a year. And to this day, Domenic, I'll have people tell me, oh yeah, I get your letters every year. And you're one of the few letters I read because it's not salesy. So I will say that was a big impact, okay?
Great.
And then now, of course, with social media and podcasting, it's different. But I would say having a lot of business contacts, keeping them up on LinkedIn or in person, and then making yourself visible. In this case, I did seminars. It was kind of like a lot of different things added together, multiplied over time. now I routinely get calls from people. Even if I'm no longer taking the call, I have one of my team members is director of acquisitions. But over the last 10 to 12 years, we really built up those contacts, and it does really matter. It does really matter.
So combination of networking, leveraging your network, and then sending direct mail pieces out to folks just to see if they've thought about selling to generate an opportunity and a conversation.
Yeah, and if I can tie it back to your audience too, this is important. The last great lead that I had, which could be my biggest acquisition ever. That's why I said it's deal number 8. Yeah. Think of this story. This particular person within 200 miles of my office remembers getting my letters over the years. That's, they told me that. And then I met them online at a recent FPA forum, where you had your breakout sessions. And I was talking about M&A and succession planning. So going full circle, this person said, oh, I've been getting your letter for the last 8 years, and I always read it. And they met me online in the last 2 months, and that could become my biggest deal ever. So this stuff does work, but it's like anything else, you got to stay with it.
You got to plant seeds, and you got to keep them watered and keep them going. So when you look back on all of those experiences, all of those conversations that you've had, the deals that you've walked away from, what are the top 3 things that you've learned along the way about, consummating an acquisition?
Sure.
That you think would, be really resonate with the audience?
Yeah. And this, I admit, is a little bit of a plug for my book, which is the Zen of Business Acquisitions on Amazon. But I have a chapter called How to Hack This Book, right? Yeah. And I'm going to give you the 6 takeaways of that chapter, and I'll give you 2 other things I've learned. The 6 takeaways were culture. Number 1, we talked about this earlier. I don't have to tell if anybody in your audience understands this one lesson, they'll save themselves and their employees and their spouses a ton of headaches. If the culture of the firm you're buying or selling to doesn't have to match identical, but has to mesh, right? Yep. If you have to work too hard, during the due diligence or the LOI, if that's too difficult, don't be afraid to back away, because you'll be like the salmon swimming uphill, if you will, right, the whole time. So culture is number 1. Perseverance. We know that not every deal works out. You have to be able to walk away. And the more power, the more you walk away from, guess what? The old expression, when one door closes, another one opens, right? Yep. Third one, valuation. You have to know, either use yourself, your accountant, your attorney. You have to know how to get valuations done. Client service, really important. Who's your team that's going to take care of either clients or customers or whatever term that you use. And then 2 more parts, the beginner's mind, which I call the white belt. You have to come in every transaction with an open mind. As you know, Domenic, there's no cookie cutters. There are some similarities, but every deal I've looked at, no matter how similar they look, they always end up being vastly different, either in the details or the onboarding process or some combination. And then lastly, I studied a lot of successful people along the way, and I copied or emulated what they had done. So those were the 6 themes in my book, okay? The second thing is, of the 3 points you asked me, that was number 1. Number 2, don't be in a hurry just because you hear everybody's doing M&A. Do not rush these deals. In fact, just like I say, like a martial artist or a, yoga or a music teacher, take your time, let it curate, because in the end, the more you absorb, the more you understand, the better the deal. And the third thing I would say is absolutely early on, have really good tax and legal counsel, because I would vet my acquisitions early on against that. And they would tell me, sometimes my accountant or my attorney would say, Tom, unless this is like a bargain basement, don't go after it, because they had wisdom of their own to share, right? Yeah. So it wasn't just my own. It was other professionals in my circle of sphere of influence that really helped. Sometimes they were the ones correctly that killed a deal. And looking back, I was so glad I listened to them. And sometimes I overruled them, and it worked out too. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. It's such a good point. I was just advising a buyer last week, and I advised them to walk away from the deal, and because what the seller was representing was not matching what was in the tax returns or the financial statements.
Yes.
So I said, look, he's giving you his word, but it's not in any of the documents. How do you he could be a very honest guy and that's great, but if you can't foot anything back, at the end of the day, how do you do that transaction? And so I said, look, and my client was really excited about this business. But at the end of the day, I said, I just don't know how. I can't tell you to do this transaction. I can't endorse it. If you want to, I understand, but I can't get behind it. I can't advise you to do that. So he reluctantly went back to the seller and said, look, nothing's matching here. Something's off. I can't move forward. Long story short, the seller came back and said, okay, I understand. I'll finance the entire transaction for you. And if you don't find what you think I'm telling you, that will ratchet back the price. And so it was great. So now my client's able to move forward, but move forward knowing that he's got risk mitigation, downside mitigation if it doesn't pan out. So, but he was, that only happened because he was able to say, I'm not moving forward.
Right. And I would say with you, it may sound a little bit hokey for people, but having studied martial arts my whole life, and there's a Zen aspect, when you let go, like you were telling your client, let go of this deal, he did, or she did, right? They let go of it. When they did, the new door opening was the same client, but with a different deal structure. So if you had said, well, let's try and work around it, and let's try to, I call the term shoehorning, right? Try to shoehorn it. If you, and I know you wouldn't, but if you had done that, you never would have gotten the same deal as if letting go. So brilliant recommendation. And again, for your audience, it's okay sometimes for the right reasons, that you let go, because sometimes that deal comes back in a different form like it happened, or sometimes the next deal you see clearly, yes, this is what I want.
Yeah. Tom, tell me, is there another example that you could cite where, the one that you cited earlier where you hired this attorney, wasn't an M&A attorney, gave you a 20-page agreement and you ultimately whittled it down, but only after the deal was potentially falling away and falling apart. Are there some other things that have happened along the way during your acquisitions where, you walked into lemons and you were able to turn it around and make it lemonade and it was a big aha moment for you?
Yes. So let me give you one, if I have time one positive one and one that I walked away from. Because again, I'm going to show the audience of the hundreds that I've looked at, I could tell you so many lessons I learned of the ones I walked away from that I then applied to the next deal that I actually did, if that makes sense. Sure. Okay. So on the one that I walked away from, this was also one in Fairfield County. And at the time I had 250 million of AUM and they had 100 million of AUM. So it would have been a pretty big, one to digest. And so the point was, one of the reasons we walked away was that the seller and I got along great, but it turns out he was really trying to engineer a way that I would pick his senior guy and make his senior guy who was younger a partner in my firm, right? Because his senior guy couldn't afford to buy his firm, right? So two things struck me right away. One, it wasn't that I didn't like the guy. He was very good, but I said, no, if I'm financing and buying this, I don't want to take on another partner. That dilutes, right, my profits. The second thing was I asked them, well, if he wasn't able to buy you out, that means I would probably was second choice. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
So that's a deal that didn't work out for the right reasons, okay?
Yep.
Now, the flip side, the one about lemons and lemonade, there was a story not too long ago, of several years ago, where this particular seller had dawdled for a year and a half, was getting back to me, but not that quickly. And they came down with a major health issue. Unfortunately, they're still alive today, but it was a major health issue. It was a scare. And I hate to say it, but you know this too. Sometimes it takes that to motivate them. And because I was patient with the seller, I'd been in touch. I said, look, I'm not going to push you, but you're not giving me the right signals. I don't want to chase you down for phone calls, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when that doctor's information came to him, he and his wife agreed, okay, this is a message. We're going to let go and move on. Then I was right there sort of patiently waiting. But I also had changed the deal terms, Domenic, saying, it's okay, you said no a year and a half ago, and this is another hint for your audience. When that same suitor comes to the door, politely, the deal structure is never going to be as good as it was. And they have to know, otherwise they'll put you off another year wanting the same deal. So if somebody says no to you the first time, bow out gracefully, but remind them, say, hey, if you like them, right, you like the process, say, I hope our paths cross again, but I have to tell you now, so you get it, you get it out there, that the next deal is not going to be the same deal structure that we had today. And that tells them there's a little bit of a price to pay.
Yeah, got it. So let's talk about that structure a little bit. So when you approach your deals, do you approach your deals with the same sort of structure elements, or do you look at it deal by deal and decide, this one I want a little more seller financing, this one maybe you don't need any seller financing, or is there a pretty set construct that makes these deals work for you?
Yeah, so if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said, Dominic, I can systematize anything, right? Us entrepreneurs,
yeah.
I can create an assembly line, and guess what? Nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah.
So the short answer is no. The long answer is hell no, right?
Yeah.
So I can't. The reason is because each deal, the person's a different age. They have different needs. Some want to relocate, but I can tell your audience that the fun part for me, which is the art of the deal, if you will, is that when you come across the willing seller and you've got a willing buyer, you can work on, for example, the deals I did years ago were more of a small down payment, large earnout.
Yes.
Now, and we had the discussion before we got on about the banker that you talked to, right? The people in banking. Now the deals are much more allowable, whether it's an SBA 10-year loan or any other conventional loan. Now the seller can get a lot of more money up front, and I'm still protected by covenants in the agreement. So to answer your question, it's definitely morphed to be more seller friendly, but no, every deal is different. They really are, no matter how much you try to systematize.
Yeah, so I'm so glad you said that. I was hoping that's where you were going, because my advice to the audience was going to be, you can't approach every deal the same. You just can't. For all of the reasons you just named, you have to be more fluid than that. And even though you might have, some boundaries within your deal structures that you're paying attention to, understand that every deal is different. But the one thing that should be consistent is you should have a return on investment model.
Yes.
Some calculation that matters to you that you apply to your deals.
Yes.
So, and you can get there lots of different ways, but always have at least some ROI targets for your deals, so you have a way to measure was this a successful deal? Was this not on the margin? Otherwise you won't know how to go do them moving forward.
And I can add to that, Dominic, if I can, depending upon the type of business you're in, and I'll give you some examples. One of my deals I did early on was not going to be financially that lucrative. Financially, I underlined. But guess what? I knew going in, there were three things we call them, accrued benefits, from the deal that I knew I was going to get that weren't just tied to the numbers. Number one, I got more experience because we used a different law firm on his side. So we had new language coming in that I hadn't seen before, that my lawyer and I loved kind of working through that. So we knew there was new IP, intellectual property. Okay. Number two, this was in a new area within a couple hundred miles of my office. It was a new geographic area, which would then set the stage for other acquisitions in that space, because I could say, oh, I already have clients in that area, right? And number three, more importantly, I wanted another, this was an easier transaction where I have a reference, someone who could say 2 years from now, oh, great, work with Tom and his team. I had a great experience. So I definitely had a conscious, so even if the numbers should always be profitable, but if you have other valid reasons why, or acquiring good talent, don't be afraid, whether it's your firm, Dominic, or others, to let people know, here's where I think I see some hidden value, and then let your accountant and your attorney kind of vet that as well.
Absolutely. Great point. You could make acquisitions for lots of reasons. It doesn't always have to be because you're trying to grow your EBITDA.
Right, exactly.
It could be talent, technology, geography, lots of other reasons. Such a great point. Hey, Tom, I could sit here and talk to you all day. This is awesome. This is a great conversation. Let me sort of start to wrap it up here, though, with you wrote this book, The Zen of Business Acquisitions. So what motivated you to write that book?
Thank you. I've been waiting the whole time for that, right? Thank you so much. I'm not shy about that. So quick story. My first book I wrote years ago with a co-author was about that arbitration. I survived the securities arbitration. I'm proud to say I won it. I wrote about it for other advisors. This one, my daughter had recently graduated from Georgetown University, and she met this amazing professor who was teaching her graduating class, if you will, or how to write books. And I said, let me meet this professor. So long story short, I got involved in a writing program, and they said, pick anything you want to write. And I thought of fiction, nonfiction. I loved her. Then I realized, you know what? I really should write about acquisitions. It's what I do every day. So that was the idea. That was the aha moment. And then along the way, they gave me the idea of interviewing, which I did, the top 8 or 10 people in financial services that do billion-dollar acquisitions, $10 billion, all the way down to the ones in my level. So between my idea and their help, that's what got me the motivation and the talent to get that thing written, which was it was actually fun to work on it. Very fun.
That's awesome. That is great. Well, great. That's awesome.
And by the way, the audio book comes out in January. So I'll have that ready to go. So you don't have to read it. You can just listen to it on Audible.
Which was great when people were traveling to work, but I've seen more people reading the actual books.
That's true. That's good. So they have an audio book, a written book, and an ebook, so they can pick whatever they want.
Any way you want to consume it.
Yeah.
So, Tom, we're going to wrap up here, but any parting advice or comments that you would have for the M&A Unplugged community?
Absolutely. So, number one, if you're like me and you're love to get, to meet new people and new ideas, you should get excited about M&A, even if it takes you, 2 years to do your first deal. Get out there, meet people, start, like we covered the lingo of EBITDA or intellectual property acquisition, or balance sheet, income statement. Get to know, the language of what we're doing, number one. Number two, don't be in a hurry. Take your time, because there's going to be, especially with COVID and everything going to reopen at some point, I think there's going to be a whole, huge explosion of deals of people who maybe don't want to be in the same business they were before COVID, meaning they want to sell. So get educated, get out there. And the third thing is, Domenic, maintain or retain a good firm like yours, or someone that really has the experience to guide them. Because for you to be objective and tell someone walk away, I can't tell you how important it is to have someone that's in your corner, but that can be totally objective and look at a deal without any emotion. That would be a huge game changer for your audience.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's great advice. And Tom, if folks want to get the book, where is it available?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon. So you look on, the Zen of Business Acquisitions. It did get #1 early release in its category when it came out, so I'm proud of that. So that's one way. Otherwise, my firm is Capital Wealth Management in Glastonbury, Connecticut. So that's pretty much easy way to find us. The third thing is, search Tom Hine, Hine, CFP or advisor, and you'll come up there too. But in the meantime, yeah, I look to do more with Amazon as they kind of broaden what they're offering. It's called KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. Yeah. That's the division you work with. And I'm learning so much more about how that, that sort of backstage process works. It's very exciting.
That's awesome. Tom, such a pleasure to have you here. Congrats on all the success. And you're a model, and so glad we could bring your story to the audience.
Thanks, Domenic. I had a great time sharing with them, and I look forward to sharing new ideas as they come up.
All right. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you enjoy our content, please remember to subscribe and review our podcast. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.